What's up, folks? So I just finished reading The Blade itself by Joe Abercrombie, the first book in the First Law trilogy. It is actually my first time reading a book written by Joe Abercrombie, actually. I've heard so many good things about him, so I figured it was time to give one of his series a shot. And after being initially a little bit apprehensive throughout the first 25% of the book, I had quite a fun time reading the rest of it. I really enjoyed this book. Now, moving forward, most of this is going to be non-spoiler. I might get into a little bit of spoilers towards the end, but I'll be sure to mark that section of the review ahead of time so you'll have a clear indication that that's what I'm getting into. With that being said, let's jump into the review. So this story takes place in this empire called the Union, and it takes place in the year 575 after the year of its founding. And now the Union has been this strong empire that stood for hundreds of years, but it's finally starting to decline a little bit, and its adversaries are starting to nip at its heels, starting to take advantage of the weaknesses they're seeing within the Union. Those adversaries are barbarians from the north, and then you have a couple different city-states that also seem to be making moves towards attacking the Union at some point in time. Doesn't happen in this book, but that's definitely underlying the plot. There are three main characters that the story follows. Logan Ninefingers, who is this barbarian from the north, and at the beginning of the book, he's separated from his group of other named men that he runs around with. Basically just a bunch of badass other barbarian folks. And he has to kind of make his own way into the world, and obviously he starts to run into the other characters from the book along the way. Character number 2 would be the Inquisitor Sandan Glokta, and this is a former war hero, somebody who was extremely accomplished in dueling and in battle, but somebody who was captured by the enemy during a famous battle. We never really get a full description of exactly what happened, but he was captured by the enemy and then imprisoned and proceeds to be tortured for something like a year or two, or some incredibly long amount of time he's tortured for, and receives all these incredible disfigurations, and basically just makes him incredibly jaded. And when he gets back to the Union, he becomes a torturer himself, because now he knows so much about the craft of torturing people. And there's this very distinct scene at the beginning of the book where he's torturing somebody, and the author kind of like walks you through the process of like how he does his craft. And it was very gruesome, but I will say that I actually really enjoyed this character, surprisingly. There was way more dimensions to him than I thought at first. Character number 3 is this nobleman, Jesseldan Luther, who is a part of the military. And when we first meet him, he's training for a dueling competition. And based on the way that we're introduced to him, it's very obvious that he's interested in the glory that comes along with the dueling competition, but not interested in the work that's required to win the dueling competition. Honestly, at the beginning of the book, he just comes across as this very miserable character, but I will say that he grew on me over time. For most of the book, we're following each of these characters by themselves as they go through their own trials and tribulations. But I will say they do link up towards the end of the book. So let's talk about some of the things that I did like that are spoiler-free. One thing that I noticed immediately as I was reading this book is that it's very cinematic. I read somewhere that Joe Abercrombie was a freelance film editor before he became an author, and I can totally see that in his writing. The book very much reads like a screenplay to me. And as soon as I had read that information about him, I honestly had a hard time not seeing that in each scene. But I don't think that's a bad thing by any means. It's a good thing. I was able to very much picture each moment as we moved from one place to another in the book. So yeah, it just made the reading experience very enjoyable. The dialogue in this book was great, super snappy, often very funny. Lots of like laugh out loud moments in this book. There's like one scene in particular towards the end of the book, which is very violent and gruesome, but there's one character who just says this very small line as he enters the scene. And if you've read the book, maybe you know what I'm talking about. He enters the scene out of a bathtub and he's covered in bubbles. And then he just says one thing, and I just died laughing. I just thought it was the perfect contrast to all of the violence that I had just witnessed in the previous chapter. So yeah, I will say that Joe Abercrombie does a wonderful job writing dialogue. I kind of just talked about it a little bit, but another thing I liked was the fight scenes. The fight scenes are very well choreographed. It's very easy to follow the combat in the writing, which I think is a skill within itself when it comes to fantasy books or just action books in general. It can often feel very convoluted when you're following characters in a fight scene. I don't think it's the most important part of the book to be good at writing the fight scenes, but it makes everything feel more believable when you can follow the character from one point of the fight to another, and you don't feel lost in the chaos of it. right? I'm sure we've all had that experience of like reading some sword fight between two characters. 4 or 5 pages goes by and you're like, I don't know where they are in the context of the environment that this fight is taking place in. And I didn't feel that way in this book. So that was very nice. I felt very grounded in the fight scenes. Also, there was a romantic interest in the book, and I thought it was pretty well done. It didn't make me cringe. You know what? I think it's fair to say I like a little romance in my books. It rounds out the story. What are you supposed to do? Read about angry men in combat and wizards for 500 pages in every book? A little bit of love isn't so bad. So yeah, I just thought the romantic interest in this was done well, and it didn't feel like childish or immature, which I often find to be a problem with fantasy books. It can definitely be something that turns me off about a book very quickly. It's like if the romance feels like it was written by a 15-year-old, it makes me want to just exit the story immediately. Okay, before we get into spoilers, a couple things I disliked that are spoiler-free. On my first impression, I thought the book started very fast. There was a part of me that wanted to spend more time with Logan in the North and have some more experience there with him before he got to the Union, just to like build out his character a little bit more. I don't know if that's just because I've been reading long ass Malazan books all year and that's where my head is at, but it's not the biggest gripe in the world. Like, I didn't hate the beginning of the book. I just thought I wanted a little more context for what was going on. My second thought about the book, and honestly, I'm not even sure if this is a dislike, it's just something I noticed. It took away from the experience a little bit for me. It's just that I didn't feel like the book had a succinct message overall. Again, I think I'm a little bit biased. When I think about stories, like, I don't know if there has to be this like overarching philosophical message in each story for them to be considered a good story. That doesn't seem to be something I want to hold as a standard for every book I read. And it's certainly not something that, like, I can read a book without a giant philosophical overtone and 100% enjoy it. But yeah, the fact that I just didn't feel that with this particular book took slightly away from the experience for me, but not that much. Okay, now we're going to talk about spoilers for a second. So if you're not interested, please click away from the video now. I have just two quick spoiler thoughts that I want to point out that I really enjoyed. There was a moment with Artie, 𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔 and Luther, and Major Column West. I mean, I think everybody who's read this book knows the moment I'm talking about. It's when Major Column West basically domestically abuses his sister. It's not that I enjoyed that scene, obviously. Obviously, that scene is freaking awful and terrible and disgusting. The action within it is terrible. The way it was done was believable. Like, to me, the dialogue, the viciousness of it felt real in a way that was like disgusting to read. It just showed the full brutality of that experience. Like, obviously, I've never experienced something like that myself, and I'm sure that there's, it would be silly of me to say that I understand anything about domestic abuse from reading that scene. I felt like it woke me up a little bit to the brutalness of this world and the brutalness that Abercrombie is going to show us throughout these novels. It was kind of like a wake-up call as we were moving into the last third of the book. And it also leads to this scene with Sandan Glokta where he's talking to Major Column West and they're kind of reuniting with each other after not speaking for this like long period of time. Sandan Glokta gets called out on the fact that he's been holding this grudge against Major Column West for not visiting him, but really it was never Major Column West's fault because Sandan Glokta's mother rejected West from visiting him. So you see Sandan Glokta have to then deal with that. But then he hears from West that West beat his sister, and you're having to see him like now accept that information as well. And they both kind of have this like exchange of truths that are like these unwanted truths. Like, neither of them want to hear these things from the other one. It kind of bonds them again in a way, the fact that they have this exchange of information, this understanding between each other. Yeah, I just felt like in the last third of the book, things just got way more serious very quickly. The other scene that I really enjoyed was when Baez takes Logan, 𝒊𝒏𝒌𝒔, was Glokta there too? I think Glokta was there too, to the House of the Maker. That was just like a really fun, cool scene, which helped set the stakes some more for the rest of the books. I loved Abercrombie's description of this wizard's tower. Like, very fantasy, very typical high fantasy. Oh, the wizard has this crazy magical tower. But just the way that he led us through it and described the environment and how it was affecting each of them and their passes through time, the fact that they didn't realize how high they were going up, all this stuff. It was just a very fun scene that was easy to imagine and super picturesque. Okay, so in conclusion, I would give this book a 4 out of 5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I just felt like it didn't grip me just enough to give it that 5-star rating. But I do think that this book does a really good job of setting the stage for future events. And I know everybody raves about this series, so I'm still very hopeful that the remaining books are gonna exceed this one. Maybe when I have the context of the next couple books, I will come back to this and say it's a 5 stars based on the information that was laid out here. But let's cross that bridge when we get there. Overall, I felt like that was a super fun adventure, and I'm looking forward to reading many more Joe Abercrombie novels. So if you enjoyed this review, drop a like down below, subscribe to the channel, and I will see everybody in the next video.